I think it's true with actually all the shootings. I think most of the shootings are somehow, you'd find out they were state sponsored. There is not a single frame showing the plane hitting the Pentagon. It went right into the heart of security camera country. There is going to be another credit crunch. I'm going to be watching Bitcoin like a hawk to see how it behaves. And at some point, people say, well, how do you know it's going to go down? I said, because there's never in the history of investing been an asset class that got over fair value that didn't eventually get under fair value. That's the law of the jungle right there. So I would say that the numbnuts at the Federal Reserve, 600 or 700 economists, they're all fucking idiots or too cowardly to tell the boss that he's a fucking idiot. And so my advice is read voraciously. If you're young and you're listening to this, I would get off this podcast because you'll go down rabbit holes and squander your life.
That's pretty good, but try it like this.
I would not have achieved what I achieved if I was chasing rabbits. Who's the most famous Satanist in the world? Where you find the pedophilia, you find satanic cults close behind. You can't read about the pedophilia networks without hitting satanic cult connections, without hitting Masonic Lodge connections. It's just the Venn diagram is ridiculous. The more fact-checking, the more the deep state's covering their ass. The risk is to be mediocre or to actually go make something of yourself. You're doing it right now with these podcasts. You're taking risk.
Yo, what up? It's DOENUT, and you tuning in to all your Illuminati news. And we are here with Dr. Dave Collum. I'm so grateful that you're here. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. And this is the first time I've done something with such an explicitly targeted title as the Illuminati news.
All you Illuminati news. Yeah, we like to go over. We use it sort of a blanket term for conspiracy.
I used that graphic last year in some writing.
This is your graphic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, is that my graphic?
We're going to be going on the fly to articles. We have a lot of fun on the show. Okay. I've been on a journey to get wicked smart for the last year or two. So I'm very grateful to have a doctor who teaches Ivy League school. I mean, I'm just very grateful, and I know my audience is as well.
Well, hold that thought until the end.
Okay. Yeah, so this is your graphic. You do some amazing work. Everybody go subscribe to Dave Collum's Twitter. I got all the links down below. But you do these years in review going down the dark rabbit holes. And this is what we enjoy. I call it the donut holes, but we go down these dark rabbit holes. And a few of the topics that you've brought up are really dear to my heart, especially with what happened in Las Vegas. But before we get into those like heavy topics, what brought you into looking down these rabbit holes of direct energy, dues, Las Vegas events, and whatnot?
Well, so going way back, my first contact with Weird, I was 18. I went to a talk by a guy named Mark Lane, who was Oswald's lawyer. And he was traveling around the country. I don't remember much. I wasn't into that stuff at all, but someone dragged me there. And the one thing I vividly remember is he said that he was hired by the Kennedys to defend Oswald. And that always stuck with me. And so, it was not hard to convince me that Oswald was not the assassin. I started looking into markets in the mid-90s seriously. So I thought I wanted to go to Wall Street, actually. I went off and did organic chemistry for many, many years and just paid attention to that. And then I started, after I accrued some wealth, I got into the markets and I love the complexity of them. I think that's what really appealed to me. I happened to get serious in the early 90s when the markets were rip-roaring and everyone who had a brain the size of a half of a walnut could make money. And I started reading about them. And by mid-98, I realized there was trouble. And by mid-99, I was out completely, 100%, not a single stock, not a single mutual fund. And somehow I talked myself into going into gold. I think it was because I was paying attention to Y2K. So I said, okay, so guns, gold, that sort of thing, prep. Turned out that was not correct, although it was correct to actually be prepared because risk is not what happened. It's about what could happen and what the consequences would be. So as I like to say, Russian roulette's a 5-1 winner, but you'd be stupid to play it. And then I kind of never looked back. So in the noughts, I owned gold equities, and energy to hedge inflation. And it never showed up in the magnitude I expected, but it turned out to be a great investment. So I compounded 13% a year through the noughts while everyone else was getting crushed. And then, I was on a bear market chat board. One year I kind of wrote a little summary at the end of the year how I did, and added a few thoughts. And then the next year I did it again. And then all of a sudden it went from 250 clicks to 9,000 or something. I go, what happened? And one of the guys said, oh, I put it on my blog. And I go, why do people read your blog, dude? And it turned out it was a pretty famous blog not too many years later. And then in 2009, I just said, okay, I've been investing for 30 years. Let's do a serious job. And the serious job, so I wrote 2009, 30 years of investing from the cheap seats. And I not only talked about investing, but I also added some color commentary. And I had some very prominent people reach out to me and say, wow, that was great. So every year it's gotten more elaborate, and I'm now limited by time. So it's gotten as long as 300 pages. And I try to keep it moving. So I try to avoid expensive laughs. Expensive laugh is where you have to take too much time to actually get the punchline out. So you really got to hit it fast. You don't have all day. And at the same time, I try to keep it funny. So I'm always on the lookout for ways to insult people better and ways to describe things more colorfully. And I read Jon Stewart's book on The Daily Show, how it was created, and he said something in it that was very important. He said specificity. He said you didn't drown your sorrows in ice cream, you drowned your sorrows in mocha chip. He says specificity always improves the joke. And I realized that was true. So things like that, little tiny tidbits. There's a guy named Magambo Guru, who old guys listening to this might know. And I watched how he wrote. He was a wildly crazy writer. He died 2 years ago. I just found out. But I used to swap emails with him and stuff. But he had this incredibly vivid writing style that I said, why is that working? And guys like Rudy Havenstein on Twitter. I'll never forget the day. I was thinking, this guy is really clever. And then one day he said, this is not fake. It's not like the Loch Ness Monster or North Dakota. And I go, that's so twistedly funny. That was such a funny joke to me. And I said, how does Rudy do that? So I kind of watched Rudy and said, what is his style? So I kind of studied the comics, George Carlin, what makes him tick, things like that. I try to include in my writing. I even include it in scientific papers, believe it or not. I've been trying to find a way to slip ligma into a paper, but I've decided it probably is not worth the risk.
I noticed that with the website at Cornell, it seems to be like you slipped in a couple comedy in there as well. And that's how I took it when it was like the boss. I like that.
Well, my group puts together the website. So.
Oh, okay.
But there's a section called Dave Goes Rogue where I used to post everything that was online that came from me that was not chemistry, but that's become an impossibility now. So I gave up on that. But there are some treasures still in there. And then I just started watching for stuff the story that was beneath the story. So I started paying attention to Michael Lewis, for example. How does Michael Lewis do it? Well, what he does is he finds the plot that he's kind of interested in, but he finds the plot behind the plot. So he was interested in, the left guard, the blind side of a quarterback, and then he ran into what's his face? I can't remember his name now, but he ended up writing about this homeless guy who became an all-pro left guard. Lewis is not as good as he used to be. He's gotten too political, in my opinion, on the wrong side, and so he wrote a book about Trump, and I thought it was awful. And
well, he might have that sickness, that deranged Trump sickness.
Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome. Yeah, I know. And so I started spotting stories that were just not being told, and oftentimes the first hint would come across Zero Hedge or something, which was. I remember when Zero Hedge, there'd be 3 comments in the comment section. It was a tiny little site.
I love Zero Hedge. I've been reading it for probably
a long time,
10 years or so.
Right. So Zero Hedge, one year I uploaded my year in review, and I got invited by Dimitri Kofinas to come down to DC to do a Russia Today interview with on capital accounts with Lauren Lister, who is a sweet woman and attractive. Oh, there's Robbie. And Zero Hedge uploaded my year in review, and it totally crashed the website. The traffic was so high. So every year Zero Hedge posts it about a day after Peak Prosperity posts it, which is a Chris Martenson website. And I just watch for weird shit. So you mentioned like the Vegas shootings, and within about 12 hours of the Vegas shootings, I was already picking up strange patterns that sometimes it took me years. Like 9/11, it took me probably 7 or 8 years before, someone threw Building 7 across my computer screen. So I didn't know. I didn't think at all about that for a number of years. But Vegas, I figured out within probably less than 24 hours that there was something wrong with that story. And it turns out the entire story falls apart. The Vegas shootings, the entire 9/11 story falls apart, right? That's an easy one. There's no way you can put together a story that doesn't involve some serious chicanery.
Yes.
And that's true with the Vegas shootings too. I think it's true with actually all the shootings. I think most of the shootings are somehow, if you dug deep, you'd find out they were state sponsored.
I saw you say that on the Conspiracy and Cocktails, and I was so glad you said that because I grew up in Las Vegas, so it really hit home. And I was in middle school when 9/11 happened, and I remember Building 7, and I remember asking the adults about it, and they didn't have an answer. They said it's just too hot, so buildings collapse when it.
I didn't know Building 7 collapsed for a number of years. That did not cross my field of view until a physicist sent it to me and said, "Look at this." And as soon as you see Building 7 go down, you go, "That's not right." Everything I've learned about physics says that's not right. And then you start digging into Building 1 and 2, and you go, "That's really not right either." And then you watch the videos, and there's 500 to 1,000 things that are wrong. The Pentagon, there's terrible problems with the story about the plane hitting the Pentagon, and they're really kind of inescapable problems. Sometimes you find some stuff that gives you the creeps, but you go, I wouldn't stake my reputation on it. Actually, I do stake my reputation on all sorts of crazy shit, but the Pentagon story, for example, you just can't make an argument that a normal plane hit the Pentagon. That can be blown out of the water so fast.
And how big it is and the track marks.
Also the fact that there's no footage. How many cameras exist in Washington, D.C.? 100,000 maybe?
Right.
I mean, there's cameras everywhere. Why was the plane not intercepted? I mean, if I said to you, how long would it take to scramble jets to intercept that plane? The answer would be somewhere between 30 seconds and 0 seconds, because I would think that maybe that Washington, D.C. would have fighter jets in the air at all times around it.
That's what they at least told us, and for sure it's true that they do. They could scramble it, and that didn't happen. It's absolutely nuts.
And the plane flew to the Pentagon, and it was doing 540 knots, a 270-degree turn. That a bunch of jumbo jet pilots all said I couldn't fly that. The aeronautical engineer said the plane at sea level would rip apart doing 540 knots. I mean, there is not a single frame showing the plane hitting the Pentagon. I know people who I think I trust who say, "Oh, I know for a fact it hit the Pentagon," but if you can't show me footage, forget it. It didn't hit some obscure building in Sheboygan. I mean, it went right into the heart of security camera country. No footage, none.
With that happening, it seems like it was like a missile or something, but this brings up the shenanigans in Hawaii. I was in Lahaina like a month or two before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. With a real estate crypto investor who I worked for, and we traveled to Singapore, spoke to Jim Rogers, interviewed the Bitcoin people as well. So like I've been behind the scenes.
Is Jimmy Rogers a Bitcoin guy?
No, not at all. And that's
I wouldn't have predicted that. I was just on the phone with a guy who just spent time with hours and hours with Jimmy Rogers. So yeah.
He was not. And he said the thing that stuck with me, because I like crypto, like Bitcoin. I could see like the good stuff, but like you bring up, we haven't gone through a credit crunch, and also that Jim Rogers, what he said, kind of stuck with me too, because he was like, the government's got the guns. That was his like whole.
Well, those are my two arguments. My big argument, one is that they're either going to absorb it and make it normal, which makes it not Bitcoin anymore, or they're going to destroy it. And people say, "Oh, you can't destroy Bitcoin." I go, if they make it imprisonable by 10 years in jail for using Bitcoin. It may still exist, but much of its purpose, at least as a resident of the United States, has been clobbered. And so there's that. And then on top of all that, it hasn't gone through a credit crunch. And so we don't know how it's going to be. I'm going to be watching. There is going to be another credit crunch. And I'm going to be watching Bitcoin like a hawk to see how it behaves.
And what is a credit crunch?
The credit crunch is where all of a sudden everyone is scrambling to get as much cash as they can. So when you have a heavily indebted system and all of a sudden everyone has to start covering their debts, which the shorter the term, the more problematic, then all of a sudden there's just not enough cash in the system. And in the past, we've printed our way out of it, basically. And we don't technically print our way out. It's a complicated story, actually, but what we do is we replace one asset class for another. So, for example, banks have to have a certain number of reserve assets, and we got pretty sloppy on that point leading up to 08, 09. And by the way, my first writing on the banking collapse was 02, May 6th of 02. I described the whole bank collapse in about 5 pages. The one I got wrong is I thought JP Morgan was going to be ground zero, and that turned out to be wrong. But the rest, I got General Electric, General Motors. I got the banking system. I said, I talked about how the whole thing's going to seize up, and I talked about the subprime in 02. Now I was getting it from the internet, so it's not like I was inventing these ideas. These are not mine. So in any event, so all of a sudden there's this scramble for cash, scramble for liquidity, as they like to say. You're very fast with that.
I'm gonna go on the fly very fast. Yep.
And
ADD, we got ADD.
And all of a sudden, banks don't want to lend to each other, and next thing you know, there's just no money. I learned that actually when I was a kid. I was talking to my dad, who was a brilliant sort of street level economist who ran a company. And so he designed his pension plan and all that stuff. So he really was very good. And we'd sit at the dinner table and I'd make some stupid statement like everyone should be paid the same. And he'd explain to me why I was just a dumb shit in gentle terms. But I go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Right. So we straightened out a lot of bad thinking by the time I was 10. We talked one day about the Great Depression, and I said, so let me see if I got this right. If you bought real estate during the Great Depression, you could get rich, which is, buy low, right? And he said, yes, but nobody had any money. And somehow that stuck with me, if for no other reason, that 50 years later, I still remember that line. And I realized, therefore, when things really go on sale, you have to have money, which means when things are rocking and rolling, you have to go to cash because you can't write them down. If you write them down, you don't have any money at the bottom. And so you got to be astute enough to get off the freight, off the train soon enough to have dry powder at the bottom. And, these guys talk about, we're keeping some dry powder. I go, 10% dry powder is not dry powder. You're just diddling the edges. If you really want to make serious bucks, you got to get the hell out. So I completely and utterly did not lose any money to speak of in the .com crash, and then made a ton that decade. And then what I blew was in the teens when I was confident the market had another halving in it. I was confident. See right there in 2009, that low there, the very tippy bottom of that thing was slightly below historical fair value if you look at a valuation chart. And it was only there about a month. And if you say, well, what kind of bullshit statement is that? Well, that's what Jeremy Grantham says too. And I had dinner with Mark Spitznagel one night and he said the same thing. So I'm not nuts. You look at a valuation chart, we spent about a month below fair value. We fell from 35,000 feet, but we never really hit the ground. And the reason is because nobody, including the guys who did it, saw $30 trillion being dumped into the system. It was an unfathomable sum. And I don't think Bernanke imagined it would take 30 trillion. I just don't think they had. I've never run into anyone who knows anyone who ever said they would dump that kind of money in. I know people say, oh yeah, I was saying they do anything they have to. I go, that's not the same goddamn thing. 30 trillion is not the same as saying they'll do anything they have to do. 30 trillion is unimaginable. But what they did is they swapped assets. So some assets they took possession of were just garbage. And so in that sense, they printed money. The other assets where they bought treasuries, what they did is they took assets that are not considered reserve assets. Treasuries don't count as reserve assets, curiously enough. And so if the bank has to have a certain amount of reserve assets, they don't get to count their treasuries, as Silicon Valley Bank learned. But they bought up the treasuries and gave them reservable assets so that the banks could be considered liquid again. The banks have been on life support ever since, in my opinion. So in any case, we're going to do it again because we've got huge debt and we've got new kinds of debt that very few people seem to know about. It's called, for example, private debt, which someone like Melody Wright has been talking about the most of. You've got huge bubble in a number of asset markets. Bubble, what's a bubble? Well, first of all, my original definition I thought was really cute. A bull market is an asset class that's gone way up that you own, and a bubble is an asset class that's gone way up that you don't own. But the other thing a bubble is it's massive appreciation pulled forward. So if something's fair value and then it goes up to 3 times fair value, that's appreciation you're not going to get in the future, period. And at some point, people say, well, how do you know it's going to go down? I said, because there's never in the history of investing been an asset class that got over fair value that didn't eventually get under fair value. It just, that's the law of the jungle right there.
With the Dow Jones right now, looking into all this stuff for so long and understanding it, when I look at it, and I'm not wicked smart in investing or whatever. I know more probably than the average, but looking at this just looks kind of crazy to me because it just looks like it's just all the way up to the top. Is that a normal reaction?
Well, if you pan back, it can kind of look like that. The key is to look at a valuation metric, not a price metric. In 2020, I wrote about my opening paragraph of my write-up. As I said, you've just woken up from being in a coma for a year and your brain is damaged and whatever. And I described all the horrible things that happened that year. And then you look up at the TV screen in your hospital room and it says the S&P's up 13%. You simply wouldn't believe it, right? So we shut down the economy right there. Imagine, if you will, a man wakes up from a year-long induced coma. And then I say, you've entered the twilight zone. The president of the United States was impeached. All sorts of crap was happening. The 10% of the global economy, corresponding to hospital insurance, had been smashed on the rocks. Everything went wrong then. And the S&P was up 13%. That it just shows you that there's no correlation between markets and the economy. There are correlations between markets and other things, though. For example, Buffett very clearly in 1999 stated that if you want to understand where markets are going to go in a secular way, just if you knew which way interest rates are going to go, you know which way markets are going to go. Now, short-term traders love to think they understand that. They don't. So what Buffett says, in a secular situation, where meaning over many, many years, if the interest rates are going up, you're screwed, period. If interest rates are going down, you're in great shape, period. He wrote that in a 1999 Fortune article. He says, it's all about the long-term direction of interest rates. Nimrods who were fresh out of college sitting in a cubicle think, well, that means low interest rates are bullish. I go, no. Dropping interest rates are bullish. Low interest rates mean you've squeezed every last drop out of the orange. You're done. So once rates are low, there's only one direction to go. We got to zero. I mean, in Europe, they got to negative. This is insane. There's not supposed to be a negative interest rate. It's nonsense. It's only negative when the state intervenes to destroy. Now, what's the most important market of them all? The most important market of them all. It's the market where lenders and borrowers meet to haggle over the value of money. And they destroyed the goddamn thing, right? That's by far the most important market. And they destroyed the fucking thing. So I would say that the numbnuts at the Federal Reserve, 600 or 700 economists, they're all fucking idiots or too cowardly to tell the boss that he's a fucking idiot. And then you get Bernanke, who talks about the Great Depression. Let's go at Bernanke, the world's expert on the Great Depression. Here's the guy who talks about the Great Depression, and this entire presentation's about how the reason we have the Great Depression is because we blew it in the 30s. Anyone who's got a brain bigger than a walnut, which apparently either Bernanke doesn't have or he's a liar, knows that there was a huge credit bubble in the 20s and the goddamn 30s was about unwinding that credit bubble. And in particular, people think of it as a stock market bubble and a margin bubble. No, it was a consumer credit bubble. People were buying cars on credit. They were buying appliances on credit, and then they ran out of money and the economy shut down. Now, if you look at a plot of the Dow, since you're so fast, go for it, from 1900 to 1940. Boot up the Dow 1900, 1940, if you can pull it off that fast. The clock is ticking. You're in a game show right now. You will see, I showed this to one of the top dogs in the Economist magazine, and he like gasped when he saw it. He says, I've never looked at that. So see to the left there? See the bubble? Go to the top. That's 29, right?
Yes.
The bubble, if you just draw a line right through it, it turns out that, now don't move from this image right now because I'm going to show you something else. But if you move right through that, the depression was just a correction. Now, without moving it, put your cursor over on the far left side, right up to the right of the 2500 label. What's that, about 1906, as I recall? No, keep going left. Go all the way to the left, all the way to the left, all the way, right to the top. Go to the top. Now, if you extrapolate across, now you're at 2948. Now go over to what's about 1981. Go to that bottom. It's lower. From 1906 to 1982, on an inflation-adjusted basis, you lost money on your capital gains. That's what owning at the top does to you. Now look at go back to 1929. When was the last time you hit the inflation-adjusted 29 price? And you just extrapolate across, and it's go to that skinny little recession in the middle of in 1987 or something. Go cut across right over 1990 something. From 1929 to 1990 something, you treaded water on capital gains.
Oh wow.
Do you think people know that? No. Go to the peak right dead center. Go to the peak dead center, just to give you an idea how painful this could be. Go to the peak dead center. Dead center of the plot, right there, that peak. Yeah, right. 1966. When did we break even for the first time? 1966. Now move to the right about there, right? From 66 to 95. That's 30 fucking years. Now, are we done? Or to the right off of this plot, are we going to get back there one last time? Because right there, go to that bottom. See that bottom? That's 09. And I said that was not a deep low. That was about fair value. Our next move could go well below fair value. And my prediction is that 67 peak, that 66 peak is going to be reached again.
Wow. I think it'll happen during this dragon year.
Okay, now here's how I think it's a better model. Boot up the Nikkei now. The Nikkei, boot up the Japanese market. So from 1989 to 2024, what's that, 35 years? We've gone nowhere. That's without inflation adjustment, it's without dividends, but it's also without fees and without taxes. Now, here's a tidbit. If you own that market, therefore, let's say you were 55 years old, you are now 85 and you haven't moved a yen. So and you say, well, who owned the Japanese market? Well, a lot of people did apparently, because 14 of the 20 biggest companies in the world were in the Nikkei. So a reasonable investor who's not paying attention might say, well, then I better own the Nikkei, because that's where all the big ones are, NVIDIA and Microsoft and you name it, right? The 14 to 20 biggest. They were ruling the world. And 35 years later, they haven't moved an inch. Now, let's say you're a young punk. You just get out of Tokyo Institute of Technology and you start buying at the top. You don't have a yen in the market, but you put in 1,000 yen a week and you start averaging down. How long does it take you averaging down, putting in a steady amount of money before you break even on your investment? And the answer is 22 years.
Wow.
So I was on a Twitter space with George Noble, who was Peter Lynch's understudy. And he said, well, you can short it. And I go, look at that thing. You can't short that. You can short V-bounces. That thing just ate your lunch nonstop. You might be able to trade it. You're better than me if you can. I can't trade that. So that's an uninvestable market. The U.S., I'm predicting, is going to become an uninvestable market. I think 40 years from now, you're going to look up and you're going to go, holy shit, we haven't moved a buck. Boot up that M2 money supply one that you mentioned before we got on. This is from Ron Grice, if you can find it fast. That is the performance provided by Ron Grice, the performance of the of the S&P 500, not corrected for CPI inflation, which is we know is a shitty metric of inflation because it's crooked, but it's corrected for the M2 money supply, which seems like an excellent metric of inflation since it's the money, right? It goes down. Now that's just capital gains. So Ron sent me an update on that and said, okay, and you don't have access to this one because I haven't used it yet. He showed me the total return, which includes the dividends. And it turns out that the total return over that period averages 3.79%. Now, that does not include fees and taxes. So the point is that in some sense, investing in the S&P is a bit of a mirage. And Ed McQuarrie of UC Irvine did an analysis that went back 200 years. And he said, except for some narrow windows, this is true. Buffett in his 99 article said, look, if you include all the fees and all the taxes and all the things you have, he didn't include the tax on your income, but the other hidden stuff. He says, the most you can hope to get is 4%, which I'm willing to call 3.79% is 4%. Now take out taxes. You're now down to what, 2.5%? If you're in a 401k, okay, you get to compound it. The average boomer, the average investor has no idea that the most they can hope to make is 4% from neutral valuations. From these valuations, which I have at about 160, about 150% over fair value, over historical fair value. How do I define it? I define it as the average valuation from 1880 to 1995. You take that window and valuations just kind of channel along. They leave orbit in 94. It's a very curious phenomenon, but they leave orbit in 94. But any valuation metric, it channels around for about 100 years. And then it leaves orbit. And the question is why? Mike Green at one point in a Twitter space, I think it was the Noble Twitter space, actually said that's when indexing got big. I think he's off on that a little. I think indexing showed up a little bit later. Curiously, very recently, someone mentioned it was in 1994 that China pegged yuan to the dollar. And then China grew like crazy and they pegged the yuan to the dollar. And I haven't yet been able to piece together why that would make the markets go nuts. But what's also true is corporate debt went crazy starting in 94. Things just lost their shit in 1994. Never to look back, except for now the markets are priced to return if you let legit PE ratios rule, and assuming that we don't have an economic downturn, stuff like that, 3%. And that's optimistic because once the froth starts coming off and we are frothy, then corporate profit margins go to shit as they have to start paying off all this debt. Then everything just goes in reverse. Now, from 1981 to 2024, we start in 81 with a PE of 6. We start with Russia's desperate for capital. They start selling commodities like crazy. China is desperate for capital. They start selling labor at slave wages, 20 cents per hour, sort of slave wages. 1 billion people working for us for 20 cents an hour. You got the boomer demographics hitting the workplace. They brought their wives with them for the first time. Demographics, and say, oh, demographics is important. So the market goes from a P of 6 to whatever, 30, 35 now. You'll see people say it's 20. I think they're lying to you. If you use Case-Shiller PEs, it's in the low 30s. The market valuation shouldn't move too much. It should flop around, but it shouldn't trend. There's no trending to valuation. If you're trending, you're saying, okay, we're just going to keep getting higher and higher valuation. I don't think so. It will become low valuation someday. Someday these markets are going to be cheap. The market valuation from 1981 to the present compounded at 3% a year. I think it's going to reverse and compound at negative 3% a year over the next 40 years. And 40 years from now, I think you'll look up and go, you know, the GDP's done fine. The economy's moved forward fine. Maybe it hasn't. See, that's the other concern. Maybe it won't do fine, but let's assume it does. And the markets haven't moved, and now they're fair valued.
I look into the conspiracy stuff, the conspiracy side of people knowing things are going to happen, letting them happen. There was just an article, Ray Dalio talking about Civil War. Our friend just brought up.
Did you read Ray's book?
Principles?
Yeah, I think so. So it's one about market cycles. It's basically the fourth turning, except he uses 6.
Oh, I have it. I read a little bit of it, but
It's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good.
I got it right there. I could see it right in front of me. If the stock market is a mirage and we see the zillionaires getting richer, maybe it's a mechanism to dupe people into destroying the middle class. Catherine Austin Fitz talks about missing billions that preempted the 2001 9/11 stuff. Maybe that is when the economy went rogue.
Do you know the date of that? This is a great story.
I don't know anything about this.
It turns out Rumsfeld stood up in front of a microphone and said the Pentagon's missing $2.7 trillion. That would be a headline moment. It turns out he said it on September 10th, 2001. What a good day to bury the lead, right? I wonder if maybe old Donnie knew something was coming the next day that would make us not give a damn. Right there, you had it right there. It was right there. You just right there. That's it, right there. Reuters. Yeah, that's bullshit. Reuters, you know.
Well, yeah, it's that's why they click it.
Fact checkers are farcically bad. The more fact checkers, the more the story's true. Period.
Yeah, for sure.
When fact checkers, when they start showing up and see that over and over and over, they'll tell you Hillary's laptop had nothing on it. They'll tell you all sorts of crap. They'll tell you the virus didn't come from a lab. The more fact checking, the more the deep state's covering their ass.
Now that you brought up the laptop, like Biden laptop, there was something that you brought up, kind of switching topics with the Las Vegas event and the laptop. It wasn't just the Las Vegas Steve Paddock who his hard drive gone, but I think you said that there was multiple shooters events that happened. Their hard drives
were gone. So when I wrote about this, first of all, I said when I wrote about it, I said, you know, his laptop's missing, and I said satirically, don't you hate it when you lose your hard drive, right? Yeah. And then I point out, but this is not abnormal according to CBS News. It was CBS or ABC. It was one of the big outlets. Wasn't some blogger. Said because they listed about 5 of the shooters that were famous, West Virginia, Virginia Tech shooter, whatever. They listed about 5 shooters, and they said their hard drives were missing too. And therefore it's normal. I go, no, that's not normal. Now I'll tell you the guys who were on this story. Tucker Carlson was all over this. I guarantee if you got Tucker Carlson shit-faced, he would tell you about the Las Vegas shootings and he would be on board 100%. And that the day one, the chief of police there said, I'm not sure that's the chief. I don't think that's the chief. He said that it had to be more than one shooter. It's not humanly possible. And the very next day, the chief of police said it was only one shooter. The very next day, the chief of police now, I think, is the governor of Nevada.
Right.
Now search Mike Kronk. Mike Kronk was a hick who was in the audience. Search Mike Kronk. Mike Kronk is now a senator. He was a hick from Alaska. And the only pictures of Mike you can find, there's Mike Kronk. Describes his wounded friend, but his story's changing. Right there. Yeah. There's Mike lying his ass off. And then someone else interviews him and his story changes. And then he gets a little sadder looking. And then his story changes a little bit more. And then he goes and visits his friend in the hospital. Now he said his friend got hit with 3 shots in the chest with an AR-15. Now you get hit with 3 shots in the chest. No one is going to believe that you stuck your own fingers in your own bullet holes to stop the bleeding, according to Mike Kronk. That's what his friend did. Then I said right away, so that's still nighttime. You can see, and I saw that and I go, holy fuck, why'd that guy just say that? There's no way. And then he goes, you know how 15 seconds later, YouTube rolls to the next interview. And there's Mike Kronk again, interviewed by a new network, telling the same story. There's 22,000 people at this place, and all they're doing is interviewing Mike Kronk. So then I start reading articles by surgeons saying, you get hit with one of these puppies, you are going to be going through a dozen surgeries to repair the damage, right? So Mike Kronk, it turns out, he and a film crew go into the hospital where his friend's at to visit him. Now, first and foremost, a hospital's not going to let a film crew into the ER, into the ICU. The guy's got 3 AR-15 hits to his chest. The only way you're going to know he's alive is there's going to be some screen beeping away telling you that he's still got vitals, because he's going to have tubes up every orifice, in every orifice. He's going to be out. They're going to have him in an induced coma probably, right? And they go in, and there's his friend laying in bed with a nasal cannula, and they're chatting. And I'm going, what are you doing? Sticking your fingers in the hole so you can talk now? And then I noticed, my wife has had 60 surgeries. I know what an inside of a hospital looks like for a guy who's never actually got a medical degree. The screen was not on. It wasn't plugged in. So Mike Kronk was what's called a crisis actor. Remember the guy got shot up on the floor with Paddock, the security guard?
Jesus Campos.
That guy turns out to see that there's a picture of him interviewing with Ellen DeGeneres, by the way. It's the only, I'm just going to let that go because I can't seem to hang it up. He's sitting there with a buddy talking with this guy. The guy looks like a handler, and then he goes on Ellen DeGeneres. The guy sitting next to him is the same handler.
Right.
And Ellen DeGeneres says, and this is the only interview you're going to do, and this and that. But the day after he got shot, supposedly, his house was surrounded by cars without license plates on them.
What?
And he heads off to Mexico. So when I wrote about that, I said, oh, by the way, Jesus, and by the way, he had 2 different social security numbers. And he goes off to Mexico. And I said, by the way, Jesus, when you get back, we'd like to have a chat because we got a few questions to ask you. They explained his trip to Mexico. They said, well, he had planned a vacation. So apparently 500 people getting shot in Las Vegas is not enough for him to cancel his vacation. And then he comes back, he does Ellen DeGeneres, who, by the way, is MGM, which, by the way, is owned by the same company that owns Mandalay Bay.
Oh.
So then it turns out that if you watch the videos, there's videos of this thing. They're shooting all over the strip. They're shooting all over the strip. They're shooting coming from every direction. Some guy took an audios and put them all together and said, and you could see it. You could see one shot's going boom, 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 and the other's going that, and you can actually hear the overlapping guns shooting.
Yes.
And I am John Cullen. John Cullen is the guy who's now come out from behind sort of disguise, thinks that the shooting was actually an attempted hit on Mohammed bin Salman from the helicopters behind the Mandalay Bay.
Yes. And you know what? I remember when this was happening, I was working for a conservative news channel and we were covering it heavily because I'm from Vegas. I know people that were there. Like I've heard the story, so I know it really happened, like that stuff really happened. And the Jesus Campos, he's on Ellen DeGeneres, which is like total mainstream propaganda. And she said, after this, we won't talk about it anymore. And then
that's right. Explicitly, as in like this is all you are going to get. Mm-hmm. And Jesus kept looking at his feet the whole interview. He was very uncomfortable. His handler was handling the whole interview.
And then
Mike Kronk, elk hunting hick from Alaska, becomes the senator for Alaska. The chief of police becomes the governor of Nevada. Another guy ends up in Lahaina. Right. For the fires in Lahaina. I'm not convinced the Lahaina story is as deep and dark as it could be. I followed a lot of rabbit holes on that one.
Okay.
It's clearly a land grab.
Yes.
If you go to Wiki, remember the body count, estimated body count of children? That, like USA Today was saying, there's 975 kids who are still missing. By the way, when a kid's still missing the day after that fire, they're gone, right? They're crisp. You go to Wikipedia, you will find that the total body count is said to be 93, and there's not a mention of a child dying.
Wow.
And the question is, why has Wikipedia got it so wrong? Well, it turns out that I happen to occasionally chat with the guy who founded Wikipedia, a guy named Larry Sanger, and he says Wikipedia is totally under the auspices of the CIA and the FBI. He says it's completely trashed at this point. Search children, search kids, find out if there's any kids. The word kid is mentioned, or child.
Nothing. There's nothing.
Nothing. No mention of kids. They were estimating 1,000 kids. By the way, there was a bunch of missing school buses. That gets us to the question that I'm still racking my brain over, and that is, were they trafficked off of Lahaina?
If you're liking this video, smash that like button, share it out, and get the full Too Hot for the Internet version over on Rumble and X. It's now playing. We go into topics that just are not allowed on this Google YouTube algorithm. We have the full uncensored video up now, playing on Rumble and X. Click the link down below to watch. Now let's get back into the video. I had a couple questions for you because we were like past the top of the hour, and I'm so grateful for you coming on here as well. I wanted to ask some business life success questions. When I was reading through your year of review, I love all the quotes that you posted on it. You even posted a John C. Maxwell quote, which that really changed my life. I never
remind me of the quote. Do you remember the quote?
I don't remember the quote. Okay. I do have it though, but just seeing John C. Maxwell back in 2008 or whatever, I started reading his stuff. I never got to go to school. I've been on this journey of reading books to get wicked smart.
Which is a Boston term, and for those who don't understand.
Yes.
I think that's from Goodwill Hunting even, or something. I don't know.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is that half my family from Boston, and they're very go to school.
My son's in Boston. My son's in Boston right now, in case he's not as wacky as me, but.
And my other side is all entrepreneurs who didn't go to school. And the question I got, because I was mentored by my family, I never got to go to colleges and whatnot. I took mentorship. So these are questions that I like to ask you is the scheduling of working, being successful, waking up, going to bed. Just can you kind of tell me a little bit about your day of consecutively, like what brought you to success? What were some of the habits that you have that you could recommend?
Yeah. I had a tortured path. So in high school, I was an okay student, not a great student. I can remember my GPAs for almost every grade back to first grade for some reason. They weren't that memorable, although I had a window in there where I was getting A's. And then it kind of middle school, I slipped back. And high school, I went 3-1, 3-1, 3-4, and then 4-1. And it was clear that I kind of woke up and said, oh, shit, college is coming. I better do better in school than I'm doing, right? That sort of thing. So it turns out I ended up going to Cornell. I said, how do you get to Cornell? Well, I didn't know this at the time, but my family went there. And I said, okay, maybe Legacy, Hail Mary, maybe Legacy will get me in, right? And I got rejected early decision. Then my dad said, well, your grandfather knows some people there. I'll have him put in a word for you. And then I got in. And many decades later, he died. And I read his obituary, and he was president of the National Alumni Association. He was vice chancellor of the Board of Regents of New York State, which is the educational part of the state that pays all the bills for state schools, which is Cornell's one of them. And he was on the Cornell Council, and he was the head of the GOP of Onondaga County. So he knew Nixon, he knew Rockefeller. So it's not a shock I got in. And then I worked my ass off every waking hour. Get up in the library at 9, came back at 11. Had to learn how to be a student because I wasn't a good student. But eventually my grades went up. And again, I started out 296. How do you remember that? 296 first semester, 305 second semester. These are not stellar grades, although it was hard. Cornell, ball busting place at that point, at least. But eventually I sort of migrated pretty much up to a 4.0 by senior year. Last minute decided against going to medical school and went off to get a PhD in organic chemistry. So I took a grad course I got into a research group, took a grad course in my junior year. It was the second semester grad course, not having taken the first semester, having only one semester of non-majors organic chemistry. So it was a real suicide mission. And I remember on the first prelim, I got 28 points below the mean. So I got my ass royally kicked. I was at the very bottom of the class. And I went to the professor, look, I'm not afraid of a bad grade, but if you think this is stupid, maybe we should chat. And I wasn't going to quit, but I was willing to talk. And he said, no, I think you'll improve. And so the second test, I got the second highest grade in the class, and that lit me up. You just can't imagine. I did sports in high school and stuff. So the competitive edge finally caught in a serious way. I took 3 more grad courses, went off to Columbia, which was the best organic chemistry division in the world. And I worked for this brand new assistant professor who I recognized was unusually talented. That was an insight that many missed. And I said, oh, there's something about this guy. And he turned out to be a once every 20-year type. So Cornell's second string goes off to Columbia as a genetics major as an undergrad. So, going off to a PhD program in organic chemistry was odd. So it was contrarian, to use market lingo. And then I got lucky. The way the US beating the Russians in hockey in 1980. So it was miracle on ice by any stretch of the imagination. And I finished my PhD research in 14 months. And I got my PhD in 2.5 years. And I got an unsolicited offer for an interview from Cornell. And then I applied for jobs after that. I said, okay, I'm going for it. So here I am at the end of my second year of grad school applying for jobs as assistant professor, which was just unheard of. And I applied for 12 jobs and got 14 interviews. The other unsolicited one was Caltech, which for scientifically trained people will recognize that's top of the food chain right there. On the interview, I decided one guy at Berkeley convinced me I was thinking about it wrong. And so by the time I got done interviewing, I decided I was going to switch fields again. And about halfway, I started reading about the new stuff. So voracious reading. About 2 years in, I had raised enough federal money to make the move. And I abandoned everything I was doing and switched directions. And I went into a field that was very complicated. And some said I was going to completely fail, and others said it was crazy. And I survived and ended up thriving. There's people who were more famous, better stats, whatever. But I put together 21 straight federal grants, for example. And statistically, based on the probability of funding, is 1 in 10 to the 13th probability. There's a lot of zeros in there. That funding record was presented to the trustees by my dean as a case study in success. And I'm the only guy to hold the 4 positions in the chemistry department, including department chair and stuff like that. But everything was always against the current. Everything was always against the grain. And I think I had this fear of succeeding and being mediocre. I think failing troubled me less than succeeding, but not really succeeding.
That's cool.
And then I got into this weird shit, and it's worked pretty well. You and I wouldn't be talking today if it wasn't working. I'm wrapping up my program after 45 years of nonstop funding, continuous funding. I consulted for Pfizer for 20 years. I was on Merck's long-range steering committee, which, there were 5 scientists in the world put on that steering committee, and I was one of them. Not a big award winner, in part because I never want to be nominated, so that doesn't help. I don't believe in letting some committee tell me my net worth. And so my advice is read voraciously. If you're young and you're listening to this, I would get off this podcast because you'll go down rabbit holes and squander your life, unless you're a professional rabbit holer. So that's okay. But I would not achieve what I achieved if I was chasing rabbits. And the other thing, more pragmatically, we're all distracted by the digital world. It's somewhere between a TikTok addiction and at least a problem. And it's true for me too. I'm on Twitter, right? But I'm 69 years old. I'm done, right? If I had a laptop and a phone when I was 25 years old, I never would have achieved what I achieved. So I tell my students first day of class every semester, if you don't find a way to close your laptop and you don't find a way to turn off your phone, even if you're trying to get it right, your friends will want to text you, your friends will want to email you, they'll want to talk to you. You got to find a way, because you will suck if you don't find a way to shut the digital world off. It's very hard because we use the digital world all the time. There's that. I discovered around 2005 audiobooks when I ordered Paul O'Neill's book after he left the Bush White House. I said, what the fuck is going on in the Bush White House? So Paul came out, and I trusted him to tell the truth. And he talked about, how they wanted to bomb Iraq from day one, period. He couldn't understand why. Why are you guys trying to get to Iraq? Well, what did they do, right? Explain this to me. So he wrote a pretty honest tale of the Bush White House being a bunch of neocons trying to bomb the shit out of everybody. But I ordered it, and it showed up as CDs. And I was trying to figure out how to send it back to Amazon. And I finally said, fuck it, just listen to it. And as soon as I started listening, I said, this is my medium. And so what I do is I actually tell my class, I said, turn off that Taylor Swift shit and the Lady Gaga shit that you're pumping into your heads as you walk up the hill, and get nonfiction audiobooks. psychology, medieval history, Roman history, history of science, you name it, economics, business, self-help, whatever. One time I said to my group, it was about 12 grad students at the time, I said, I want you to go find a self-help book. You define what that means. Read it, and I've set a date for a group meeting that we'd have, and I said, you're going to give us a 10-minute book review on what you learned from that self-help book. And then I used to do weird shit. Like, for example, I used to have my students go pick 2 communications. Those are these little short articles. So it's not a burden to read 2 of these things. I want you to go pick 2 communications out of the literature. And then they'd show up with them. And then I'd randomly pick one of their 2. I'd shuffle them, and then I'd deal them back out. And so they'd have one they chose and one they got by chance. I'd say, next week, you're all going to come in and for 10 minutes, you're going to explain why these 2 research groups should collaborate.
Wow.
What is the Venn diagram overlap that allows them to find common ground, to use their 2 skills or interests to do something different? And so I believe in randomness. I coach 2 collegiate sports. Name for me a faculty member who coached 2 collegiate sports. One was Taekwondo. I was a low-level sport. I was a low-level coach. I used to love refereeing. That was what I really liked. And beating the shit out of undergrads. They used to love beating the shit out of faculty members. So it was such a win-win situation. And one of the guys I used to beat, then he got better, and I said to the master, who was the man, he's now 8th degree black belt, I said, that kid over there, he's really good. And the master, I hate calling him that because he's really very Americanized, he didn't see it. Well, that guy ended up losing 7-4 to the gold medalist in the Athens Olympics.
Oh, wow.
I watched him go by me. And then one day he came and gave a talk. He's a professor at Penn. He came and gave a talk, and he gets introduced as having competed in the Pan Am Games. They didn't realize he'd been in the Athens Olympics. And he stood up there and he said, oh, I have such fond memories of Dave beating the crap out of me when I was an undergrad. And I'm sitting going, oh, you are so bullshitting now. I said, there was a time when I could, but there reached a point where I just couldn't handle him at all. But I used to love sparring the undergrad. And then I was the head coach of gymnastics for a year, I think. And in any event, be different. There's no such thing as no risk. So if you don't perceive risk, that's a risky path. If you perceive the risk, you're on the right path. So there's no way to avoid risk, right? The risk is to be mediocre or to actually go make something of yourself. You're doing it right now with these podcasts. You're taking risk. And don't be afraid of risk, and don't underestimate the guy at Berkeley who told me I was doing something wrong. He asked me 2 questions. Well, first of all, I'm at Berkeley, and again, I'm at the end of my 2nd year of grad school, so I'm not really ready for interviewing for a job yet, but I am. And one guy was very famous at dinner the night before my interview. He said, be very careful what direction you head, because it's very hard to change. And I heard a guy not only telling me, choose your path wisely, but also a guy who sounded like maybe he wasn't sure where to go. Oh. At the peak of his career, he wasn't sure what to do next. The next time being interviewed by this guy way outside my field, he says, I got 2 questions for you. He says, what's the most important unsolved problem in organic chemistry? And I had been a genetics major, so I pulled something out of my ass. I think I said something like, well, chemistry of smell would be a good problem for an organic chemist. He says, oh, that's good. And he says, okay, my second question is, why aren't you working on it? And for the first time in my life, I was speechless. And I thought about it for a second, and I'm just sitting there dumbfounded. And it turns out I gave him the only answer he'd accept. Now, there's a lot of ways I could have blown it. But what I said to him was, and I wasn't trying to get out of it at this point, I said, I never thought of it that way. So you tend to say, what do I know how to do and what do I do with that? And what he was saying is, no, figure out what you should be doing and figure out how to do that. And, if I decided I had to do, nuclear physics, that would be stupid because I didn't have the skill set. But for example, I'm in a field that's called kinetics. It's mathematical. I don't have fucking calculus. I don't have majors P-Chem, which is I took kinetics prelim and non-majors P-Chem and got an F on the kinetics prelim. and I'm now a kineticist. But part of it's because we got to drop a prelim, and so I said fuck it, and I didn't study, and then I took it, and I said, well, it shows. Lowest grade in the class of 150 on in the field that I am now considered one of the world's most prominent players.
That's awesome.
Right, and so don't be afraid to go off into the unknown. But at the same time, when I was a freshman, I wanted to go to vet school. And I decided not to because the probability was low, but it's a subtle question because I had about a 1 in 10 chance of getting into vet school. It was clear I was not going to get in on great grades because my freshman year was not very spectacular, despite lots of hard work. I just wasn't a student yet. But I also realized that at the end, I would have to take a bunch of courses in animal science and stuff to get into vet school that if I didn't get in, I would not want that education.
Yeah.
And therefore, what I concluded was you should compromise, go to med school. And you can take anything to go to med school. All you have to take certain science requirements. But what I did is I took a bunch of chemistry electives for laughs, and then decided at the very last minute, Christmas break of my senior year, sitting in the ground round with my girlfriend. I'm doing on the one hand, on the other hand. And I said, I don't know what to do. And she says, I think you do. I said, yeah, that's right. So I went off to grad school on the assumption if I failed, I would just go to med school.
Wow.
Have plan B. When plan A fails, you're in a shit show of a place. You better have thought through plan B when your head was still on straight. I send every major. Someone once asked me, what's the thing you regret most? I couldn't think of something. And they said, that's amazing. I said, well, maybe not buying Bitcoin at 5 cents. They said, that's amazing. I said, well, I live and die by maxims and by aphorisms and by quotes. And you wouldn't believe, I had to give 4 graduation speeches to the graduating seniors, and you wouldn't believe the topics I hit. They were entertaining. They were not normal graduation speeches. I think I got the biggest roar when I asked the mothers, what's the smell coming out of their son's room? But one I used my whole life, and that is I asked myself, I'm making a big decision. If this goes very poorly, will I forgive myself? If the answer is yes, then go for it. The answer is no, it means you don't really believe you should be doing it. It's not a well thought out idea. And so when I went off to grad school, I said, yeah, sure, I'll forgive myself. I'll just go to med school, right?
Wow.
So you get married, you say, if it doesn't work, you go, well, it means your reasoning was fine and it didn't work. And, I sold the shares of a company called LabCorp that went up 100-fold, but I know why I sold them. It would have been nice to hold on to them for 100 bagger. I didn't,
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you for asking.
Yes.
The question's as important as the answer.
Yeah. This has been absolutely wicked smart, mind blowing. I got wicked smart. I got all of Dr. Dave Collum's links down below, Twitter. Yeah. I'm looking out for all of your information. Where would you like people to go? Subscribe?
Nothing. I publish that at Peak Prosperity, but if you're on Twitter, you can't miss it. If you're online just reading anything remotely economic, you probably can't miss it. I was talking to some guy from Fidelity who was in my office, and he started talking about my year in review, not realizing it was mine.
Oh.
Shit like that. I was talking to some currency trader from Singapore. Larry Summers read the fucking thing.
Nice.
Right? Part of it got uploaded to the Congressional Record. Catherine Austin Fitts uploaded an entire section on the pension crisis coming in her Solari report. So it makes the rounds. I try to make it funny, but it's getting hard to be funny. It's getting very hard to be funny. I
like the humor a lot. It helps with the learning, in my opinion. Well, thank you.
It also keeps you going, right? If it gets tight, if it gets boring, you're gonna rap.
Yes, do that. Well, thank you, Dr. Dave Collum. Everybody, smash that like button, share this video out. Go subscribe to all the links down below. Much love, and God bless you.